as you can see in this aerial view, the museum is designed around a void, an absence. The center of the museum is really not really a museum space at all. It's where there is no museum. And the museum has many components. It has the Holocaust Tower. It has the Garden of Exile. It's really a building that speaks to the story of what happened, but not only to the past, which we cannot change. The past cannot be changed, but the future can be changed. And that's really the hope. And the light in the building and the way the building sits in tension with the Baroque building, because you enter really into the Baroque space, which was the old courthouse of Berlin, later on the Berlin Museum. And then you really descend into the underground, and you're really confronted with a kind of overture of three different roads. One leads to a dead end, and really that's the dead end of Berlin. It's a different Berlin today, with that ray of hope in the midst of darkness. It's a very, very special space. It's not heated in the winter. It's not cooled in the summer. It's a space of just of echoes of what Berlin was, is, and will be. And there is also a symbolic garden. It's on a tilted plane. It's hard to explain these things because they're not really about pictures. They're about being there. It's a tilted plane with 49 columns, with earth inside and vegetation growing high up, more than 7 meters above. And it's a symbolic garden because of a central column, 7 times 7, 49 columns. Central column has the earth of Israel. The 48 have the earth of Berlin, and it's 1948, the creation of the State of Israel. So it's about exile. It's about something as a consequence of these terrible events. And there is also the central void, as I describe it. It's segmented across the building with bridges that connect you across. You can see it, you can even walk into it in certain places. But as you can see, the building is organized around what is not there. And what is not there is not the art or the materials, but what is not there are the people, the spiritual carriers who are citizens of Germany, of Berlin, of Europe, who have really vanished, not by themselves, but through genocide. And it's a building that stands in the middle of Berlin. It's a building that I designed even before the wall came down, before 1989, November. But I always considered the building to connect across the divide of East and West Berlin, because that's what the Jewish population was. They were really uniting Berlin as citizens of a very important country, important place. And it's a building that has really made a big difference in how people can relate to their city, to confront the history, not to hide the history, not to put the head in the sand and escape from the history, but look at the history in a creative way and see how the future can be moved to a more positive sense of life. And of course, Berlin is one of my favorite cities. It's a great city that is moving ahead. Great, great place to, and I lived there for many years. It's a building that is close to my heart, and also my first museum, actually. Very often people ask me, where was I on September 11th? Everybody knows, because that's the day the world changed. Everything changed in the world. How we see the news, what we think of the world, politics, the military, the wars. And how strange that September 11, 2001 was the day after 13 years of living in Berlin, the Jewish Museum was to open to the public. And by 2:30, approximately in the afternoon, Berlin time, one saw those images, terrible images of the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York, on the Pentagon, in Pennsylvania, and the museum never opened to the public. How strange, how strange is the history connected across calendars. So the museum, which was supposed to open on 9/11, did not open. It took some more days until the museum really opened, because there was such uncertainty about the world. And then, as a result, strangely enough, I competed in the competition for Ground Zero, and I became the winner, the master planner of the site. That's one of my first drawings. You know, it's not just to rebuild so many buildings. You know, there are 10 million square feet of office spaces, major towers, infrastructure in the underground, trains, subways. It's really the heart of the city, But my idea was different from my colleagues and others who competed. I did not want to build anything in the center of the site where people perished, where the tower stood. Even though it was a piece of real estate, nobody declared it a sacred zone. But to me, it was sacred because 3,000 people perished there, by the way, from over 90 different countries. It was not just Americans, from 90 different countries. So I created the idea that the footprints, the waterfalls should be there. The building should surround the site in a kind of gesture of the torch of the Statue of Liberty, which is such an important symbol for immigrants in America itself, and to create a tall tower, 1776, a symbolic height of the Declaration of Independence, to really create a piazza, a social space going all the way down to bedrock where the museum is located. And since I'm speaking also about museums, that was an important part of my idea, that there should be a cultural component really deep where the event happened. There's one of the sketches and one of the latest renderings. The project is almost really completed. It's maybe 85%. Tower number 2 is not yet built. Tower number 1, tower number 3, tower number 4 are built. The visitor center is built, the footprints, the museum underground, the performing arts space is under construction. So much of it is done. And what was important about it? What was important is to bring people together. There are many stakeholders here. It's not one client. It's not like the president who is the client. There are many clients. There are families of the victims, number one. People in the thousands who lost their loved ones. There is the Port Authority with 7,000 engineers and architects who owns the site and leases the site to private developers and their own architects. There is the governor of New York and New Jersey, two very powerful governors who are in charge of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. There are the PETH trains that run under and the subways. And of course, the mayor of New York is in charge of the streets of New York. So you have to be able to bring consensus in order to build such a project. Most master plans don't happen because after 5 years, things have changed and there are new ideas. But I sought to create a master plan that could be actually built because in a democratic society, you can bring people together and share in the idea of rebuilding New York. And by the way, since I started working on this project, 250,000 people, 250,000 people have moved to Lower Manhattan. It's no longer the Manhattan before, empty at night, just banks, Wall Street. It's now a living neighborhood, which was my intent in the master plan, which is the victory of life over death, the victory of life over the evil deeds that terrorized not just America, but the world, and continue to do so. So one of the first things that I encountered when I went to the bedrock was this element, which we should never have seen. It's called the Slurry Wall. And when I walked down, actually, with Nina, some 75 feet down into the underground, I felt that my life had changed. I understood something that no one could understand without touching that bedrock where people perished. And by the way, this wall is a great dam. On the other side is the water of the Hudson River, the pressure. So if this wall had collapsed, all the subways would have been inundated by water. It would have been an apocalypse. But this wall stood, and I really thought it was a primary foundation to be given to the public in the museum itself. And there it is. It's very difficult to expose a foundation because foundation is usually, you put loads on top of them in order to build on top of them. But I wanted to open this foundation, which is still supporting the site, and make it available to the public for the people to be able to see that wall and to be at the bedrock level where the event happened. And by the way, when Pope Francis came to New York to give his ecumenical speech, he didn't give his ecumenical speech in Central Park, in Times Square, or in the cathedral. He gave his speech at the Slurry Wall. And I thought that was really significant. The speech about unity of people across religions, given in New York at the Slurry Wall, in the bedrock of the ground of the World Trade Center. Of course, very important, the names of all those who perished are engraved around the footprints. And my idea from the very beginning was to bring waterfalls in New York because there is so much hardscape, so much asphalt in New York, so much noise. But this is an element of nature. You can have an individualized experience of silence, and you can stand in front of these footprints, and which are, by the way, exactly the size of the footprints of the towers that stood there. You can have an experience which really, I think, is a spiritual experience in the middle of a great city, in the middle of a city that is active and interesting. And of course, that's the, you can not see the torch completely, but tower number 2 is missing. It's still taller than the Empire State Building. It will be built because the foundations had to be constructed before anything was built before. And that is a testament to New York, to the fact that one has to balance memory of the tragedy, but also the future of New York, which has always been a future of optimism, of excitement, of energy. And I think that I realized because I myself was an immigrant to New York, and that is part of the statement in this master plan for Ground Zero in Manhattan. And, I came to New York, it's one of my first drawings. I came by ship. And I stood on the deck, like many immigrants, looking at the phantasmagoric skyline of New York, which is unbelievable when you see it from a ship as an immigrant. And I really didn't even know what was carved on the Statue of Liberty. A poem by Emma Lazarus, which says, "Give me your poor, you're tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." It's a poem about immigrants, the poor, the people who have been rejected from the world. Come here. Here you can breathe free. That's a beautiful thing. And whatever you hear about America coming from American government, don't believe it. America is a country of immigrants, is a country of people that have been rejected from other places who can come there. So here is a project in a beautiful part of the United States, another museum which I built some years ago, Denver, Colorado, the Rocky Mountains. The Cowboys, it used to be called the Cow Town. And I was able to win a competition to build a building really in the center of this place. It's a very dramatic building, the Denver Art Museum, which is a museum unlike any other museum. It's a museum of contemporary art, museum of African oceanic art, a museum of changing exhibitions, a museum that has really re-established Denver, not just as a cow town, but a great cultural place. I called it, really, this museum, 2 lines going for a walk. Because there are 2 lines. There's a line of culture that you can follow, but you can also follow the Rocky Mountains, the line of nature. And combined together, they create a very spectacular set of spaces that emulate, in part, the natural surroundings of Denver, but also create a new sense of space in the middle of the city, create exhibitions, create really a place for people to meet, a very dramatic building, as you can well see here. It's a building that cuts across the street, connects with the bridge to the old buildings of the Denver Art Museum, and is a new powerhouse for this beautiful city. You can see the city developing all around it. I was lucky to win a competition. I proposed to make a piazza. It was just a project for the museum, but I proposed to create a piazza, to build housing, to really change the space of the city for people to live in. And you can see that the exhibitions are not just things that hang on the walls, but they're light exhibitions, they're installations, performance art. It's a 21st century museum. It's not just a museum of the 20th century. Of course, it has very, very large exhibition spaces, mega exhibition spaces. Actually, the Yves Saint Laurent, the great fashion designer, had one exhibition in the United States. He was offered New York, Museum of Modern Art, Los Angeles Museum, Chicago. He chose Denver as a statement. That's really the future of fashion and future of space for people. So there are many spaces, many kind of scales of spaces. You can see the housing that I did on the other side of the street. Behind it is a garage, which was part of the necessity to build a garage for thousands of cars. Of course, it's the United States. But I created a piazza. You have sculptures by Klaus Oldenburg, Beverly Pepper, and so on. So it's really an art space in the center of the city, and now it has developed really to a neighborhood of new museums. There are another new museum, there are galleries, housing. It's a dramatic change of the city, and I think that's the important thing, that even here, though this is a small museum, you can see the impact of a museum on the neighborhood, how the neighborhood is going to change. Suddenly there are cafes, places to be, places to go. That's the power of architecture, not just for itself, but to help to create a better neighborhood, a better living place. And here it is, together with the golden dome of the state capitol. In the background, the housing, the museum, and you can see a developing, beautiful city in the Rockies. Very different museum, which I recently completed, dedicated to this man in China. I didn't know about him, Zhang Shizhong. He died in 1909. He was kind of a person who was lost in Chinese history, even rejected out of Chinese history in the 60s. But he was the man who was responsible for industrializing China. He went to Germany, he went to Luxembourg, and he bought steelworks. He brought steel companies, steel factories to China. He was the first person to produce steel in the center of China, a city called Wuhan, which is equidistant to almost all cities in China. And he created modern China. And I was lucky to build a building which is based really on the ascent of industry in China from the Sun Yat-sen revolution of 1911 to all the historical elements of the Yangtze River, the boats, and created a building that stands in the middle of the city. They call it not the big city because it has only 6 million people, but I wanted to elevate the building and make it available as a space for people in the city to enjoy. So I created a kind of a theater also on the ground level. I elevated the building on 2 large pillars, which are also exhibition spaces and archives. It's a building built out of steel because it was commissioned by the largest steel company in China, and it tells the story, you can see, of the industry of Zhangjiang, of the Wuhan city, and has many, many aspects that are really interesting in developing a museum, modern museum, in a beautiful, active city of Wuhan. Here it is, a place that I have seen people dancing, people performing, a place that you can relax, a place that you can also see outdoors. You can see through these large windows the industrial fragments which still remain on the site, the steelworks, which are still on the site. They're no longer steelworks, but I hope they will be renovated for people for various uses. And at the very top building, there is a spectacular observatory where you can see the developing city all around you. And it's really a building dedicated to the power of modern industry, industrialization of China that goes beyond politics and beyond ideology to something so real as creation of steel. And I think it's a museum that you can see is changing the area in this beautiful city and opening up the space, not only vertically, but also horizontally. Another museum that I finished recently in Dresden. It's the largest museum in Germany. It's the Military History Museum. And of course, military history in Germany is very, very big. Dresden was called the Venice of the North. It was considered the most beautiful city in Germany. It was a city full of art, full of beautiful churches, full of music. It was really a center of Saxony. And probably you might not know this sad photograph. What happened to Dresden in the Allied bombings of Dresden in 1945. The city was completely destroyed, completely leveled by the Allied bombings. Well, I created a building. I renovated the old armory. You can see that it's a very large armory, which very soon became a museum in the 19th century. Then it was a museum of Saxony. It was a museum of the Nazis, museum of Hitler. It was the museum of Stalin, of the Russians. Then museum of East Germany. And then after unification of Germany, question was, how do we go on with German military history? And I created a building. You can see this vector, which is a kind of a triangle, which points to the first bomb that fell on Dresden, really just beyond the building, and points to the triangulation of the bombing of Dresden. At the same time, it projects itself out to give a view of the beautiful city of Dresden. So there it is. There is a self-similar form to the first bombs that fell on Dresden in 1945 February, and that's why it's tilted in that particular way. Also, you can see that it's interrupting the chronology. The building is chronological. It starts in 12th century with the Teutonic Knights, or the German Teutonic Knights, and it goes all the way to the present, German troops in NATO, in Afghanistan, and so on. But it's interrupted between 1914 and 1945. This wedge, this vector interrupts that chronology, and you have a completely different space inside it. Inside of the museum. It's a space that really doesn't have the same exhibits. What are the exhibits there? The exhibits are emblematic. They ask questions. Why do people follow authoritarian leaders? That's one of the questions that is asked. Nobody can answer this question. Why do people march when they're ordered to march? Why do people kill when they're ordered to kill? No answers are given, but that's really the kind of vector into the future of Dresden. There is the armory itself, a large space that I renovated because it was really destroyed by the East Germans totally, and I brought back the impressive architecture of that time. And then there's that cut. I removed the columns through that cut, and I created a space out of a different material. It's concrete, it's leaning, it's spatial, and you sort of glide into this interrupted space in a different way. You know, there's an exhibition of animals. Who would have known that beyond the lions of Judah and the elephants of Hannibal, modern world has also employed animals. Laika, the first dog in space, biological weapons. Nature is being employed in human violence. So those are the interesting exhibits. Of course, toys, such an important element of introducing children to violence, are part of the exhibit. I integrated the old building's stair here. And of course, things that come down from the sky, things that destroy. What does it mean for us? And at the very top of the building, at the top level, it's called the Dresden Blick. It's the view from Dresden of all the destroyed cities from Dresden. Wieliczka in Poland, Rotterdam in Holland, Coventry in the UK, cities destroyed and bombed from Dresden. So then you ascend and you actually leave the museum. You go through a door and you're suspended in the wind of Dresden. You're suspended high up. You have the view of the Frauenkirche, you have the view of the rebuilt Dresden, but you're also standing in the triangle of catastrophe. And you're literally in front of the museum. And that was my idea, that in a democracy, Germany is a great democracy, people are in charge of the military. Military is not behind walls. Military is responsible to civic society. And that's really what this museum is about. It's a dramatic building, a building that is not only about war, but about what happens after these catastrophic wars that came from Germany for so many years, and what happens into the future. And of course, as I said, without hope, you would not build a single building, because that's really the reason to build a building. Very different project in one of my most beautiful cities in the world, Nice, in France. And this is, I call it my French year, because I won 3 competitions in France. And I was asked to build really a large, complex project which contains offices, hotels, retail, stores, cultural facilities, really right in the center of this incredible city. It's, as you can see, the building is almost a block long. On the left is the central railway station of Nice, where you come by train. You can see the Gare de Nice on that avenue. You can see that block really right in the center of 2 intersecting streets, between the tracks and a big highway that was built in the 70s. So it's a complex urban space to reconcile and bring people across this divide of the city. There it is. It's really in the part of town which needs a lot of improvement, and it's a building that faces both the rail tracks, the highway, and a main shopping street. You can see that it's created out of crystalline forms, which are very dramatic for the different functions. These are models of the building. And you can see that creates really different urban spaces from across the street. This is at the intersection. You can see the highway just above it. The kind of bridge to that secondary neighborhood, which I think will be now primary neighborhood. And very important how it is seen by cars, by people coming to the city, not by train, but by vehicles. And a very dramatic building that will have, the Apple Store and museums and cultural activities, really transforming a beautiful city, a historical city, but with something new. And I think that's the message, that even if there is beautiful architecture of the 18th century, 19th century, we need something contemporary. We have to contribute something dramatically good. And I compare it to a bank. If you only take money out of the bank, there won't be any money left in the bank. You have to put something back into the bank of history. And that's part of the idea of such a building. There is another building really dealing with climate in a beautiful city in France also. This is the city of Toulouse. as seen from the space station. That was kind of my idea. How is Toulouse seen from the space station? In the center, where that red arrow is the building I proposed. Again, very close to the railway tracks, but instead of proposing a low-scale building, very big low-scale building, I proposed a tower, because I think it's more elegant. It's better for the city to assert the importance of Toulouse as a space of aeronautics. That's where the Airbus is built. It's not just an old city that is, the pink city of 18th and 17th century. It's also a very modern city, industrial. So it has to also speak about something fantastic, the ascent of the tower. But it's not just any tower. It's a tower that really brings the gardens really deep. It's not just a skin of greenery. It's a deep garden that cuts into apartments, hotels, public activities, and retail. So you're surrounded by gardens, standing on this first platform that we propose to really bring across, so that the railways, again, are not cutting the city, but bringing it to the Mediatek and the new part of the city on the right-hand side. Dramatic building, which, of course, it's not easy to build such a building. You can imagine that the French historians and French heritage authorities, there was a meeting with at least 50 people from around France, whether to approve such a building. Well, I was lucky that they did approve it, because they saw that there is a virtue in a tall, slender tower that says that this is a modern city. This is not only a touristic city of old type. This is a city that has developed and will continue to develop with new facilities and new ideas. And if you think about it, by fast train, which is being built today, less than 3 hours from Paris, you will be able to be in Toulouse. So again, right on the Canal du Midi, right in the most beautiful, really aspect of French industrial architecture, with the canals and the lacs, with the Mediatek on the right, making a gesture to connect the city with very dramatic architecture, and that's under construction. Of course, when you go to the top, there are public spaces. It's not private. That's very important. It's not private. It's public, and I think you will have the most fantastic view of the Pyrenees. You will never have those views from the lower streets of the city, but here, from this cultural space, I think you will enjoy something unusual. Okay, I never built a house before, but I had a chance to do a house. Most architects start with a house. I ended my career with, well, it's one of my last projects. It's not the end, because I'm building another house. So that's the plan. It's a very small house, but you can see it's not a box. I don't like, we have to go beyond the box. It's in Connecticut, about an hour from New York. It's standing in this green field with trees. It's hard to describe, because it's a stainless steel building, a monocoque construction with no structure inside, kind of free folded space. It doesn't even have a constant color. Sometimes the building is black, brown, green, blue. It doesn't have a right angled wall, so it reflects light in different ways depending how you approach the building and the weather. So the building is mysterious in terms of how it is. It's, of course, not big windows. It's a sustainable building with little porches, following the light in the winter and the summer, creating really something very intimate. And on the inside, it's completely wood, like a wood cabin, solid wood. It's oak. And I wanted to make the building really to resemble my clients. They are very cold on the outside, but very warm on the inside. I think that's true for a lot of people. So that's... And really, it's a work that I was able to do in every way, because they asked me to do the sofa, the kitchen, the cabinets. I never had a chance to do everything in a building. But here it is. Really, you can see the form of the building, the light of the building, my furniture, the kitchen, how the external form comes into the building itself. So the stainless steel comes into the building. There's glazing. This is the kitchen, piece of the library. I was even able to design the shower and the bathtub. And I never liked the English bathtubs, with the curves and all those medical associations. So it's really a kind of a different bath, a different shower, a different bathtub. And even my, the faucets, which, still come from the 19th century, I thought could be made much more beautiful, that are kind of a straight line. They come to a straight line when you close, open, the water comes out. It's something really like a piece of sculpture in the house. And of course, the lighting in the house is very important, to create an atmosphere that is very intimate, very domestic atmosphere, and of course, bedroom. I even designed, of course, you have to design a good bedroom, very small but very beautiful, and of course, the house as a place to be for people to enjoy life in this beautiful place. By the way, my clients who are art collectors, they're a couple, they're art collectors, told me that the one thing they don't want is to bring their art here. They want the house to inspire them. But I really have to tell you, I made only one mistake in the house, because they gave us the key one for a weekend, and Nina and I went for a weekend to stay in the house. And then it's terrible. Now Nina asked me, why do we not have a house like this? So I have to work hard now. I'm lucky to work with this man, Richard Leakey, a man who I think is one of the foremost people who created the modern science of anthropology. He discovered the Turkana boy. His parents, the Leakeys, discovered Lucy, the first kind of human, proto-human being. Where do we come from? Evolution. That's really Richard Leakey, how men became men. And here on the Rift Valley, he asked me to design really a museum, a place to communicate the story that we really all come from Africa. We are all coming from there, from this region. And this is where humanity really began, and where the story of how it began technologically also begins. So here are, again, the Turkana tools, the first tools. And think about it, the leap technologically. I mean, we have computers, but think of the idea that someone had to have, looking at a rock, to hit it with another rock, to try to understand that you could get something sharp, which could be used to kill or to break something hard. It's an incredible leap of the imagination. And we have to be impressed how fantastic the story of human evolution is. How amazing the brain, the human brain. Now we talk about artificial intelligence and so on, but think about just a human brain coming from a world that is natural world, has evolved into a dominant player in the world. So here's the museum. It's based on those tools. It's a dramatic, it has the hammer tool, which is the observatory. It has the large stone and the flint itself, and the entrance right here on the Rift Valley. It's a very dramatic building with spectacular exhibits, 21st century exhibits. It's really sort of a place to come to and experience where the Rift Valley, where did people start walking? They walked north and south and east and west. How did this all begin? And to create really an iconic place that's in Kenya, that people will come from all over the world. And of course, Richard Leakey, with his amazing power and personality, tells a little bit of the story in this short video. If there is sound. Wait, there is sound. Stop. Stop, stop, stop. Go back, yes.
I began to look for fossils Lake Turkana 50 years ago. But over the last 50 years, we collected sufficient number of fossils to demonstrate a remarkable story about how humanity came to be what it is today. And I want to portray from the beginning what happened to the Big Bang, what happened to this block of rock flung into space and developed ultimately atmospheres, water, and how out of that life began. The story now is so complete, and yet it's never been told in a celebratory. If we can get across the message, that we're all one species, we all have a common ancestor. Then the issue of bigotry, colour, racism, just simply pales into the real stress against the real story of what we have to do to survive. The last big
I think the sound is really bad, so let's stop it. Let's stop it. There's something wrong with the sound. But I wanted to show you, it shows the museum, it shows the intent, it shows the really remarkable story of Richard Leakey, who really is one of the prime discoverers. But let me go on, because it didn't work. The technology is obviously not adequate. But if I could go to the next slide. Yes, that's what I want to talk about. I don't want to finish this project, this talk, without really speaking about this museum, which really, even though it is one of my smallest museums, maybe the smallest one, and I've built many, many museums, I really love, because I love the city here, Vilnius, the people of Vilnius, the people of Lithuania, small country, but a special country. And the idea of the Butkus family to create a museum that shows the power of Lithuanian art. That's fantastic, and I was really inspired with the story of what it means. This is some of my first sketches about the building itself, how to create a kind of harmony that relates to the traditions of Vilnius, to the classical architecture of Vilnius, the materials of that architecture, but at the same time to create harmony in attention with art, so that there is a dialogue between art and the city. And I think what's unusual about this museum, that it's not just a white box which you enter and get into a dream, but this box is penetrated by light and by glimpses of city and other people in the museum. And I think that's really, to me, the important thing about this outdoor theater, that really sees the street itself and the city itself as the greatest museum, because that's the inspiration for art and how that sense of spatiality works into the future. So it's a very three-dimensional building. It's really very compact building and very efficient building. Most of the building is devoted to the public. Of course, there's some back of the house, but most of the building is actually what people experience. So a kind of dialogue between simple and complex, complex and simple, between the symmetries and asymmetries in the building, between the abstractions and nature, between Vilnius and art. Those are really very early sketches from my idea of how this building could be located in this site where the old Soviet, style cinemas were, and how to create something that really isn't just a door to a museum, but the city is the door to the museum. It's not the door to the museum, but the urban space is the door, which I think in the future will be, and we saw it today with the chorus, can be used in so many creative ways, musically, in terms of performance, in terms of extending the invitation to art to all citizens of Lithuania. And there it is, very early sketches, sort of how to take this simple cubic box and to open it through a series of cuts, perspectives, and to bring light in a sensitive way that is important for people. That's one of the early models, a wooden model that really shows sort of the penetrability of the building, how the building is structured, really a very early drawing of how to organize it, how to organize the functions of the museum, the exhibitions, but also the restaurant and so on, how to create a plan with this museum and sculpture garden, and how to really create something really in the round. Technically, this is just some drawings where you can see the exhibition hall, you can see how the building really projects itself, how it opens itself, and gives many, many possibilities to create a space not only for objects, but also for people. It's a social space. It's a space where you can meet friends, where you can also appreciate the old gates of Vilnius, bringing those traditions back into a new neighborhood and creating a sense how spectacular this 18th century building just across the street, when you look at the lunettes with the carved heads, how beautiful is this whole corner, and how it takes the energy of the center of the city really one step further to the hall, to the spiral stair. By the way, this is my first circle. I never designed a circle before. I've designed curves, but I always stayed away from a circle because it's such a cliche. Anybody can do a circle, but I tried to make a circle that is folded, that is in fact a kind of the center of the building. And by the way, the crane the building was constructed from this point. That is the center of the building. It's not just the center stair, but really the epicenter of the entire structure of the building comes from this spiral, which is very unusual because it's folded, it's penetrating a number of levels, and its form is not quite circular. It's affected by what is happening around it. And I thought it was very important to create really glimpses of views. And I think it's just as interesting to look at people looking at art as it is looking at art, because people looking at art is the final art experience. So yes, there's paintings, there are great treasures here of Lithuanian art, paintings that were not exhibited during the time of communism, time when there was oppression of Lithuania. I come from Poland, so I know this. I'm not so far from you, because I also remember the oppression of the Soviets on Poland, on Polish people, and the imposition of false culture and not allowing, but people never give up. People in Baltics never gave up, people in Poland do not give up. Yes, that's actually part of the statement of the museum. And to create really spaces that really give a sense of the city itself, which is so beautiful, even though they're just regular buildings, regular courtyards, regular people living around. It's a sense of Vilnius as really a epicenter, and I really consider it among the many cities I've been to and worked in, one of the most beautiful cities with difficult and painful history, but a city that certainly moves forward and that I think will reinvent many things. I think we can be sure that in the future many things will not come from the United States, China, or England. They'll come here from Lithuania. Thank you. 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 Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. For you. Should I have a few minutes if there are any questions. Yes, there's a question.
How would you define the museum? For you, the museum is what exactly?
The definition, how would I define the museum? Well, look, the word museum is referring to ancient Greece. The muses. The mother of the muses is memory. And the muses are poetry, language, astronomy, the stars, geometry. Those are what they call liberal arts, arts that are free, that you can think freely. So that's what the museum is. It's to bring the mind and the heart and the spirit of people to art. And art is all those things. It's memory, it's geometry, it's poetry, it's everything that is for us free to think about and can never be taken away from human beings. Even if there are violent regimes and terrorists and wars, that cannot be taken away from human beings because that's what human evolution brought to us. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? I have, I think, one more question. You have one more question. Okay. Since you're the only one, I can answer it too, I hope.
What do you think about microclimates in the museum?
Microclimate. Well, you can see that some of the daylight that comes helps, for example, with the lighting, to keep the lighting levels down. So it's very carefully sited in terms of topography of light. It's a small project. It's sustainable. It's a modest project. It's not a huge project, but I think many precautions have been taken to create a museum that will really stay in the city, be easy to maintain, be easy to clean, be easy to adapt to flexible functions. And I think that's also part of the, if you walk around the museum, there's a flexibility in the museum. Of course, there are walls that have been put for exhibitions, but those walls can also be put many different ways, opened, closed. There can be many ways to organize the museum, and I think this exhibition is really the first, but I think there will be many different exhibitions here with many different ways that different curators will be able to exhibit art and show how art is connected to Lithuania and to the city of Vilnius. Thank you. Thank you.
Antrą valandą lauksim visų Vytauto Landsbergio pokalbėje su Edmundu Jaklaičiu. Šitoj salėje.